Hi and welcome back, it's Lois here. Today I'm going to be painting a loose vase of flowers, sort of semi-abstract, and using lots and lots of wet in wet technique. I'm starting off with a pencil sketch, and using the hake brush I'm going to get a lot of water soaking into the paper. I want the paper to be very wet. It's cotton paper, so it'll stay wet for quite a while. I'm not wetting it evenly, I'm leaving gaps, particularly where I've drawn the flowers in, and I'm putting the water in different sort of directions, and that should encourage the paint when I put it on to flow freely. Now I'm going to start off with a fairly dilute mix of yellow ochre, just because I like to use a sort of earth tone yellow to start off most paintings. It gives a sort of a glow underneath everything. Now I'm just randomly stroking in horizontal and fairly vertical strokes here and there, just to kind of emphasize the fact that the flowers are kind of sitting against either a wall or a window or a shelf or something like that. Now I'm adding, in a similar way, a weak mix of viridian hue. Again, leaving plenty of gaps for the white of white. Just going to put in a little tiny bit of quite thick paint just around the left side of where I want the vase. See where I've put the paper on that the paint's really running, and now I'm just flicking water onto the painting with the hake brush, just because I really want that soft diffused effect of mostly horizontal running and diffusion of the paint. Putting across more paint, more raw ochre, more viridian in places, just kind of to go against the vertical running of the paint. I'm using the horizontal strokes, so I'm sort of setting up a kind of a pattern in a way, but very very loosely, and letting the water do most of it. Now where it's dripping down a bit, I'll mop it up with a clean damp brush so it doesn't run too much into where I want the nice bright flower tones to be and hues. It's quite lovely watching the water run down like this, and just maybe adding a few more little bits of light colour, encouraging it to run down with the brush, being quite delicate here really, not overdoing it. Now I'm going to take the same sort of mixture but of alizarin crimson. I shall list all the colours below for you in the information below the description. I'm now going to introduce a little bit of pink, and it'll blend naturally with the yellow ochre and the viridian hue to kind of produce quite a lot of different shades and tones, maybe some orangey or purpley, bluey sort of tones. Again using mostly vertical and horizontal brush strokes. Now I'm flicking with a clean wet brush, flicking water again to encourage more of horizontal running of the paint, and sort of mixing together of the paint, and some nice areas where it's diluted the paint and gone quite nice and pale. Right, now I'm going to start on the flowers themselves, and I'm just going to lightly spray the flower area, not all over, just in patches. And on the hake brush I've got some slightly thicker alizarin crimson. I'm just dotting it around where I've drawn the main flowers in pencil. I can still see the lines through that pale paint, so I'm just literally using the edges or the corner of the brush to try and just get in some very loose, very rough suggestions of roses or peonies, that sort of multi-petalled flower. I'm making sure that I leave plenty of white and use a stronger mix of paint, and some paler in places too. Just maybe do a little bit to the background if you think it needs a little bit of just some directional strokes, just to slightly interfere with the vertical running of the paint. And I'm just going to put in some fallen petals below the vase. I think that often can make quite a nice detail when you're painting flowers. Again, some stronger paint. I'm building up. It started off with pale paint and now I'm building up with stronger paint. That should stick. Now I've dipped my squirrel mop brush into some clean water and I'm just softening some edges here and there. I don't want all of the flower petals to be hard edged. I want them to sort of blend out a little bit into the background, so you can see that it's done that here. You may have noticed in the sketch at the beginning there was 3 rosebuds near the top, and I'm just using the shape of the squirrel mop, just pressing it against the paper to introduce just the first wash for the shape of those 3 rosebuds. It will run down, but I shall define it a bit later. I'm going to just use the corner of a card just to slightly begin to define the shapes and direction of those buds. I just think that helps to emphasize. I'll put more detail in later. I think I'll just strengthen up that side of the vase a little bit more. And then mix up some cerulean blue with the alizarin crimson into a sort of purpley colour, reddish blue. And I'm just going to begin to introduce some sort of mid-darks. Not quite as dark as I want it to go eventually, but it just will begin to bring out some of the sort of shapes and shadows in the bunch of flowers, in the buds and the petals a bit more. I'm just going to continue to use that darker colour just to maybe get some shadows in to the vase and underneath the vase and in the sort of the shelf or the window ledge, wherever it is that our vase is sitting. Just suggesting really shadows and patterns, and then maybe just touching in a little bit more into the flowers themselves. Now I'm just going to put a bit of viridian into the surrounding area, sort of as a framing device, and I should have zoomed out now at this point, but I'm afraid I didn't realise that I hadn't. But you won't miss much. In a minute I'll zoom back out and you'll be able to see what I've done. You can see that there is some green as a framing device across the bottom and up the right hand sort of side. Now I'm just, while it's still wet, going to use the corner of the card just to define the edge, the left hand darker edge of the vase and the base, and then just to pull out some slight shapes of petals just to define where the flowers are a little tiny bit more. I'll put more detail in later when it's completely dry, but I think this will just be a good starting point for being able to see where to paint in the lights and the darks once it's dry. So at this stage it's really just a matter of making sure that you've got just about everything that you want in the painting. I mean, I've still got to put some leaves in. I'll do that in a minute. Just trying to work out, I think my flowers are starting to look okay. The vase shape's all right, and I'm very happy with the background. Just a little bit more playing around with it. I don't even mind if I get blooms or cauliflowers when it's in a picture like this. It actually looks quite lovely when that happens. It's all part of the sort of loose, free look of the painting. Now, just before I add some leaves, I've got a stiff bristle brush and I've dipped it into quite rich but wet red paint. And while the background's still wet, I'm just going to spatter some paint drops in. Some of them will go onto drier areas and stay quite dark, but others will sort of diffuse in, as you can see, into the background and look quite effective. Right, I'm going to just spray around the side, around the edges of the bouquet of flowers a little, because I'm now going to put in the leaves, and because it's starting to dry off a bit, I want to make sure it's wet enough so that some of the leaves have hard edges and others of the leaves are very soft and diffused, and I shall define them, some of them, a little bit more as part of the finishing touches towards the end of the painting once it's completely dry. But I just want some nice softly diffused green areas and the suggestions of leaf shapes. And that's it, we've finished now, and you can see that I'm just pointing out areas where I'll put some darks just to make it pop a bit more. Okay, it's dry now, and I'm taking the rigger brush and I'm just going to put in, with some quite thick viridian paint, viridian hue, I'm just going to put in some stems for these rosebuds, and just a couple of little sort of sepals wrapping around the base of the rosebuds. It just, I think it finishes the look of them off a little bit better, defines them a bit more. The next finishing touch I'm going to do with my new brush, which was a gift from a friend. It's a lovely synthetic mop brush or quill brush, a Paulina Bright size 1, and I'm just going to put some nice rich alizarin crimson onto the flowers and the petals here and there, just to define them a bit more and make them look more finished. I still want it to be a very loose looking bunch of flowers, but I want to just bring out a bit more colour and a bit more depth. Just add some deep colour to the base of these rosebuds, just to give them a bit more shape, a bit more 3D-ness. I think I'm just going to dip into some indigo, cobalt blue and alizarin crimson, just to make a nice dark colour, just to pull out some shadows under the vase and around the vase and around the flowers and the petals themselves. It's a lovely responsive brush, this one, for making marks. It's lovely to use. I'll use it also the same colour, and I'll put in some sort of leaf shapes as well, just to give a bit more shadow and depth around those suggestions of leaves around the bottom. I just want this to be very misty, very dreamy, very sort of ethereal, but bright and beautiful as well. I don't want too much detail. I just want it nice and loose and sort of misty, if you know what I mean. And we're now at that point that we usually get to towards the end of a painting, when really it's just a matter of looking at your own painting, which will be different to mine, and just seeing what it needs, whether it needs a little touch of dark here and there, maybe a bit of softening or something like that, and just get it to the point where you really like it, but try to keep it as fresh and as loose as possible without overworking it. I think I'm now going to finish it off with my bristle brush and some spatter, just to get some nice small drops around the border. I think we'll just finish it off nicely. That should do. And here's the finished painting. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching that, and I hope you'll give it a go and try and stay as loose as you can. It's so much fun. If you enjoyed this, please follow the link in the description and take a look at my Patreon page, where we've got a lovely group there and we do lots of things similar to this. There's lots of lessons and tutorials. Thanks so much for your support, and I'll see you soon. Bye.